Hello, Christopher Brent here, coming to you today with a musical podcast on the subject of music schools. So I'm going to talk about some of the best music schools here in the United States, and I'm going to address some areas of concern. Maybe you are a young student who's going through the audition process right now, and you have a lot of different ideas and thoughts in your head, and you want to get a little bit more clarity when it comes down to making your decisions. So I'm here to help. I am going to address as much as I can because I feel like this is a very important subject. It's a big decision, and I know there's so many issues and areas to research. So I'm going to talk about some of the best music schools here, and I'm going to talk about some lesser known schools and why I think some of those lesser known schools are actually very good as well. So let's get down to business. I am Christopher Brent. I'm a piano teacher, a pianist, and a music educator here from Michigan in the United States. I got my degree in piano performance from Oakland University, which is a great school here in Michigan. I also studied at the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, which is part of the University of Cincinnati, and I studied at Central Michigan and Wayne State University in Detroit as well. So I studied in a lot of different places, and I had good experiences actually at all of those schools, but I had uniquely different experiences as well. So I'm going to share a little bit about that, and hopefully that can provide some insight for you. So maybe you've seen a top 10 list or a top 20 list of the best music schools in the country here in the United States. There's many great music schools around the world, of course, but I'm going to focus on the ones in the United States. So these schools you will frequently see in your top 20 list. So I'm going to read these off, and I'm going to talk about some of these schools. So usually at the top you see the Juilliard School as well as the Curtis Institute, I should say. So Juilliard and Curtis are at the top, and then you often see the New England Conservatory, Boston Conservatory, Manhattan School of Music, Cleveland Institute, Mannes College of Music, the Eastman School of Music, Oberlin Conservatory, Peabody, the Berklee College of Music, which is a little bit more of a jazz commercial music school, Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, which I'm a little biased to. I think it's a great school. Indiana, University of Indiana, the Jacobs School of Music, top-notch, phenomenal school. Michigan, University of Michigan, Yale, USC, San Francisco Conservatory, Rice University. Those kind of make up the top tier list, if you want to call it that. So they're all great schools in their own way, but there's many, many, many other awesome schools around the country, and that's what you have to look at. You have to find the school that's right for you at the time you're at in life, if that makes sense. You got to look at where you are in life and how you want to go about developing, because many of these schools, especially Juilliard and Curtis, ones that are you might see as like number 1 or number 2 on these lists, so to speak, that have this incredible reputation, are looking for students who are basically already at an ultra high level of professional ability. And that doesn't mean that if you go to another school that you aren't at a high level, so to speak, but Juilliard and Curtis are looking for students who are at this extremely high level. That's the atmosphere you're going to have at those schools. It's going to be highly competitive. It's not going to necessarily be a nurturing environment. So you have to look at if you want that or not. And not everybody wants that ultra-competitive atmosphere, and not everybody is ready for that as far as their maturity is concerned. That's a big thing you have to look at. Other things, such as tuition costs, are very important. Many of these schools, especially the conservatories, are extremely expensive. If you look at, let's say, New England Conservatory, Manhattan School of Music, if you're an out-of-state person, Oberlin Conservatory, another one. If you're out-of-state looking to go to these schools, the tuition costs are probably now, this is 2018, probably now going to be maybe $40,000 a year. Could be as high as $50,000 a year in some of these schools. So that's a lot of money for an undergraduate degree over 4 years, right? So you're looking at, without scholarship, out-of-state tuition, close to $200,000 right there in debt. So that's a big concern, right? Do you necessarily need to spend that money or that high? Do you have to spend that much money to go into music and succeed at a high level for your undergraduate degree? I don't think so. I think there's many other places you can go for a fraction of the cost and still be very successful. So that's another issue there. Tuition is very high at many of these schools. Now, if you look at a school like the University of Michigan or Indiana, those are state schools. So if you live in those states, you're going to look at tuition costs that are still going to be somewhat expensive, but not as expensive as, let's say, the Manhattan School of Music. I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here. So you got to look at tuition. You got to look at the competitive nature of the atmosphere of the school. If you want that type of environment, if you are at a place in your studies where you can handle something like that, those are things you got to really be mindful of. You got to look at what instruments you play and see if that school excels or has the right teachers for you in that particular department. Right off the top of my head, I know the Cleveland Institute has a great string program. So if you are a string player, you would be very attracted to the Cleveland Institute. That's one of their top programs, right? Some schools are top-notch with a reputation overall, but a particular department might just be mediocre, right? So you got to do your research on what instrument do you play, who's on the faculty there, maybe try to communicate with them as much as you can and get a better idea for what's going on with your particular instrument. Also, you might look at whether you want to do performance, or if you're doing education, music education, you got to look at, is that school geared towards that? I would think something like Juilliard School or Curtis Institute is going to be highly performance-oriented. So I don't think of the Juilliard School as being a place to go to get a music education degree, necessarily. So I'm just throwing these ideas around. So those are things to think about. So you got to think about tuition, the atmosphere, the department, and the teacher, right? You have to find, because you're going there and you're going to, for the most part, study an instrument privately one-on-one for 4 years. So you've got to look at, is that teacher the right teacher for me? I've been at music schools before where students have come into the studio. I'm studying with a teacher, and students come into that studio and they're maybe a little overwhelmed by that teacher. They're not sure about some things. So you want to try to do as much research on who the private teacher would be for you once you get to that music school, because that's going to be a big area of concern, obviously. So do your research on that. So another thing, many of these top-notch schools, for instance, when I was at Cincinnati, I was doing undergraduate studies there, and it was a very competitive atmosphere. I liked the competitive atmosphere, and I wasn't intimidated by it. I just thought, hey, this is the real world. There's good musicians out there, and I need to compete with them, and this is it, right? So that helped me, but that's not for everybody, right? The thing is, though, that at a school like that, there is a lot of emphasis that's placed on the graduate students. So you have to be able to deal with that. Many top-notch music programs cater a little bit more to graduate students, so you have to know that going in. That's where the whole idea comes into my mind about, you could say, a music school that's not in this top tier, but really helps nurture young students. And, take a school like where I was at for a little while. Central Michigan is a great school that does this. It builds up students. They go in there, they have a healthy background, and maybe they've studied their instrument for many years, but they're not quite at the level where they're ready to enter the Juilliard School or something like that. A school like that is a great place to go for them to learn so many elements of musicianship and character, and there's a environment that's wholesome and holistic, and it builds up the student, and that's a great thing for young people, and I would recommend that for probably most high school students that are going into college. And I know it doesn't sound like it's all that fun, or doesn't quite have the appeal, right? Because I remember you're coming out of high school, you want to go to these top-notch schools, and you want to be part of that experience. When someone tells you, hey, go to a school that doesn't quite have the the high tuition costs, that's maybe local, that has some good teachers, that can provide you with a good, nurturing, holistic experience. You're just kind of like, no, I'd rather go to one of these top-notch schools, right, and go take over the world, and go off to New York, and go to the Juilliard School, right? But you can get really eaten up if you get into a music school like that, and you're kind of stuck in the city, and you're there. Maybe you got high tuition costs. Maybe it's competitive. You're having a hard time keeping up with that. You can get very lost and overwhelmed, and that can lead you to some dark places. So it's, I think, better to really be in that situation where you're in a holistic environment at a more local school, we'll call it, or maybe a state school that's in your the state that you live in. That's a better place to be. And then if you're kind of at the top, if you want to say, in that environment, if you're one of the best students at Central Michigan or Western Michigan or something like that, then it's easy to go from that, right? You can kind of graduate there and go to a school like Indiana or Michigan or something like that, one of these schools that's one of the best in the world, really. You're going to be ready, and it's going to work out well, and then you can get a graduate degree from a school like Indiana or Michigan or something like that, and maybe go on and play in a top-notch orchestra, or you can get a position at a college or music school somewhere around the world, or you can be a performer or something like that. So I'm primarily talking from a musical perspective here, but some of this can translate over into other areas like dance and maybe even drama and other areas of the arts. But yeah, I think that healthy environment there is really, really important. I know it doesn't sound fun, it doesn't have the appeal, right, of like going off to a top-notch music school right away when you're 17. That's the thing, and keep this in mind, that there are great performers who have gone on to have a successful career, and they got an undergraduate degree from somewhere other than the Juilliard School, right, or Curtis or the New England Conservatory, right? So it does happen. There's many successful people. In sports it happens. There's many great athletes, went to schools in divisions that weren't the Big Ten or the SEC or something like that, and went on to have great careers as professional athletes. It happens. So be open-minded and listen to those who are advising you if you're a young student, and definitely don't feel like a failure if you don't end up at a school that's on the top 10 list, if you want to call it that, right? There's a lot of great schools out there and a lot of wonderful teachers who really want to help motivate and nurture college students. So be open. That's my advice as someone who's been to different music schools. I've been to basically 4 music schools, and I ended up at Oakland University when I was a little bit older because I took some time off from school to perform. But when I went back and finished my music degree at Oakland, it was a great environment because it was actually a pretty good mix of some competition among students and a nurturing environment. It was a very nurturing environment. Overall, I had some fantastic teachers, and I learned so much, and I felt very prepared going out into the musical world after that. And I ended up, getting some other jobs teaching and performing and accompanying and things like that, and I'm thankful for my education. So yes, do your research and be mindful of the things that will come up at top level music schools, like high tuition costs. It's getting crazy expensive to go to these schools, so you pretty much need scholarship assistance. Unless you're, I guess, well off enough to afford it on your own, and some people are, and that's that's a good thing. So, so do your research on the department, the teachers that are there, and what the atmosphere is like, and also the ensembles. Many of the ensembles and the choirs and everything do a lot of neat things, so you want to do some research on that stuff too. So if you have any questions, please email me. I would love to try to help as many people as I can. My email address is chrisbrentmusic@gmail.com. Visit my website, www.christopherbrent.com, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon.